So, like a lot of aging millennials, I really love Banjo-Kazooie. And Banjo-Tooie, in fact. I think they're both great games. But you know what this video is about. You clicked on it not expecting a review of classic N64 games. You're here to watch me talk about the reboots. There have been two separate attempts since the Baron Bird's glory days on the Nintendo 64 back in the late 90s, early 2000s, to bring them to life for modern gamers like you and me. Neither of them went very well. I'll Never Love Again, in fact. They both went so badly. But which one is worse? You know, like, I've thought about this for quite some time. Which game between Banjo-Kazooie, Nuts and Bolts, and Yooka-Laylee ruin things more? We're gonna find that out today. We're going to do this semi-objectively. I say semi-objectively because these are, after all, just one person's opinions. You may like one or both of these games. That's fine. I'm not here to, convince you otherwise. Mostly I'm here to sort out my own feelings, because these games, while very different, I feel like fall into a lot of the same trappings. Just for a little bit more context as to how I'm going to do this before we get started, back in November for the Extra Life Day of Play, I did a full stream completing Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts in one sitting. And in chat on my Twitch channel there, we did a lot of arguing about whether or not Yooka-Laylee was worse. And I hadn't played Yooka-Laylee since it came out. And this is something that I've been fighting with my friends for like a long time, the endless debate. So I did a stupid thing, and I replayed Yooka-Laylee. I didn't 100% either game, heavens no, I'm not that much of a masochist. But I did clear the final boss. I got enough plot tokens to have an encounter with the big bad of the game, as it were, Grunty and Capital B. Capital B. So I've replayed both games relatively recently. They're both fresh on my mind. Again, to be semi-objective about this and to come to a conclusion, I have decided to put Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts and Yooka-Laylee head-to-head in 5 different categories. The overall concept, the aesthetics, so like the graphics and music, the writing and characters, world design, and mechanical design. And we're doing 5, so there is no tie. There will be a winner at the end of this. Only one will emerge from this arena as the slightly less inferior video game. I figure we'll go through point by point. I'll discuss kind of what each game does wrong, as well as the merits, if there are any, depending on the category, before ultimately giving my decision as to who the overall winner is and by how much. So you know what? Let's go. Let's do this. We're gonna have a grand old time. So the concept, I feel like, is a weird place to start because it's so broad and like even more subjective than even every other element of the game. But what I want to try and do is look at what each game was attempting to accomplish and how they accomplished it. This is very important because Yooka-Laylee is a response to Nuts and Bolts in a lot of ways. So let's get this out of the way. Let's start with Nuts and Bolts, because everyone knows how this song and dance goes. You have Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, beloved N64 3D platformer adventures that go into hiding after the Microsoft buyout of Rare, only to come back out of the gates with a game about building a bunch of stupid cars. And there was a lot of waffling, I remember, in the pre-release about like how much platforming was in the game and how much it was related to the old games, how the developers wanted to go in a new direction, and of course, nobody liked that. Nobody wanted Banjo 3 to be about building cars. Like, not a soul. This is not something anybody wanted. And by contrast, Yooka-Laylee is sort of setting itself up for victory right out of the gate because, it's a response to that. It's just said, hey, Microsoft, we fucked up while we were there. We have all these corporate overlords, and they made us make Nuts and Bolts. So we're going to go form Platonic. We're going to gather the gang back together, and we're going to make a new game that's like a proper Banjo 3, like an actual 3D platforming adventure. It's going to be great. It's going to be tremendous. And I mean, we all saw how that turned out. So you would think that this would be an easy point in Yooka-Laylee's favor. It basically comes down to this. Do you think that the developers should be rewarded for trying something new? Because this is a common refrain I hear about Nuts and Bolts, is that it's a good game, but not a good Banjo game. Now, we're gonna get into why that's wrong. But for the time being, let's consider Nuts and Bolts on its own merits. You know, 3D platformers, dead genre. You know, Mario was pretty much the only game in town. Still relatively true. There's a couple of other indies like Hat in Time doing work like that. The thing about Nuts and Bolts was that it was not a game that was corporately mandated. Like, Microsoft didn't ruin Banjo 3. That didn't happen. If you look at what all of the developers and the information said at the time, their story was pretty consistent. It was, we wanted to do a new Banjo game, we wanted to do a remake of the original, and we tried all these things. None of them worked. We thought that the formula was getting stale, it was getting tired. We were not excited about the prospect of making Banjo 3 anymore. And then I believe that they had another like kart racer spin-off in the works at the time that kind of got rolled into it that became the vehicle building mechanic. So all that's to say, like, make no mistake, Nuts and Bolts happened because the developers wanted it to happen. This was not a Microsoft decision, no matter how much, like, you know, how much self-deprecating humor there is by people involved with that game now. Let's not rewrite history here. So on the one hand, I think that we should be encouraging new ideas in the games industry. On the other hand, you know, Nuts and Bolts is proof that a new idea isn't necessarily a good idea. I'm still tempted to give this point to Nuts and Bolts though, and here's why. Super Mario Odyssey is proof that you can make this sort of collectathon 3D platformer, you can make it modern, you can make it exciting, and people will love it. Yooka-Laylee should have evolved. The fact that it spends so much of its time, all of its time, wallowing in what once was, is a real detriment in the game's favor. I remember back when Playtonic, before they were Playtonic, when they made that Twitter and like were trying to get the gang back together to make a new game, like at the time, I was hopeful that they weren't going to do what they did. I didn't want them to just like take Banjo-Kazooie and like, you know, slap a green coat of paint on it. I wanted them to make a game that was as fresh and exciting and fun, full of as much character and wit and charm that those N64 games had. It didn't necessarily have to play 100% like Banjo-Kazooie or share all the same tropes, all the same characters as Banjo-Kazooie, but that's what they did. Nuts and Bolts, ill-advised as it may have been, there was at least an attempt to be creative and like marry the Banjo formula to this quirky car mechanic. I think that was ultimately their downfall, but they tried. Yooka-Laylee didn't try. Okay, so aesthetics. This is much simpler, I think. This point goes to Yooka-Laylee easily. Now, Yooka-Laylee is not a good-looking game by any stretch of the imagination. There's a lot of like PS2 era looking like bullshit. I'm willing to give them some rope because it's an indie game and not a like big budget AAA game like Nuts and Bolts was. Nuts and Bolts has maybe among the most hideous redesigns of an art style that I've ever seen in a video game. The environments look okay. They're not spectacular. But I mean, you know, they're all right. But the characters, I do not know what they were going for with those characters. You know, famously blocky. Banjo's got these little like beady little shark eyes. Like they don't like he looks like he's gonna like stab you in a back alley. And you know, all the other characters are on a spectrum of character designs. Like Kazooie looks okay. Grunty looks fine. I mean, it's kind of hard to fuck that up. She's just a skull in a robo suit. I mean, it's a logical redesign considering the state of her deteriorating body. But like, just the rest of the characters, like, it's just not a pleasant or attractive design. And so Yooka-Laylee for all of its technical failings, there are a few environments that I remember thinking like, oh, this is quite nice. This fills me with the same sort of like joy and wonder that I did have when I was first playing Banjo-Kazooie as a kid. Like particularly that ice level. I think the ice level looks really nice. It's got some nice artistic touches. Character designs in Yooka-Laylee, I don't love them, but they're definitely easier on the eyes than the nuts and bolts designs. Like they are more. This is one area where sticking closer to the original aesthetic and just trying to update it worked a lot better in their favor, because nuts and bolts, they tried to do their fucking Lego bullshit and it looked awful and it is awful and I hate looking at that game. So point for Yooka-Laylee. Okay, so writing and characters, you know, the humor, the charm, that's an important part of any Banjo game. And this is a really hard one because both of these games fail pretty hard in this category in a lot of similar ways. So the thing about Banjo-Kazooie is that it's remembered for like its dry British humor, and it has that, but the original game, pretty sincere little game, pretty straightforward fairy tale about a bear and a bird. It's got its little joke, its little bits, its little burps and its farts and whatever, but it was pretty straightforward. If you look at it, there's a lot of sweet little moments in that game. Banjo-Tooie is a lot more sociopathic, and that's what makes Banjo-Tooie great. That's like the best thing about Banjo-Tooie is that it has this really, really, really distinctive style of writing and humor and characters. Like I love that. I love that about Banjo-Tooie. The problem is that somewhere along the way, like Rare got a reputation for being like self-referential, and that became the entire joke, the entire plot. You know, every once in a while Banjo or Kazooie would reference, you know, being in a game. Gobi would talk about going to the fire world, like all that stuff. That would happen sometimes, but in Nuts and Bolts, that is the entire fucking plot, and it's like a Duke Nukem game. You have Lord of Games, the worst character of all time, basically God. You have God coming from the heavens to settle the rivalry between Banjo-Kazooie and Grunty. You know, there's a lot of dumb, cheap shots at old tropes that are like sub-Duke Nukem tier, just pointing at an old thing and saying, remember this? This is Banjo. You love Banjo, don't you? And I think that's the weirdest thing about Nuts and Bolts is, at once, it's so reverent of the old games because it knows it has to be. They're already like, you know, pissing everyone off and making it a car game, so they have to go out of their way to throw in all these nostalgia throwbacks and this fan service. But on the other hand, the whole plot of the game is like, you know, that whole beginning of Banjo being like old and fat and like, oh, we're just gonna you know, have you collect as many like tedious objects as possible in a straight line. You know, just really dunking on, you know, the legacy of those games. And it's not especially funny or clever. I'm not like insulted by it. I'm like, oh, pish posh, like how dare they infringe upon my beloved Banjo-Kazooie. But it's not especially funny. Duke Nukem is a bad franchise and a bad character, and the closer that Banjo and Kazooie are to Duke Nukem, the closer I am to death. And you know what's funny? Yooka-Laylee has the exact same problem. So much of the game's humor is that sort of like, oh, you know, this happened on World 3. Look, we're pointing out that we're in a video game. Like, isn't it funny? Laugh, funny. Like, Banjo-Tooie, guys, I don't think if you understand, like, if you haven't gone back and played it in a while, just how sociopathic Banjo-Tooie is. Like, Bottles gets fucking murdered in the first, like, 10 minutes of the game. Banjo-Kazooie, like, straight up kill people in cold blood for collectibles, and it's played for laughs. There's that edginess to Banjo-Tooie that's more than just, like, you know, video game references that made it funny, that made it charming, that made it work. And it also helped that it set itself apart from the original because the original was so much more sincere. Neither Nuts and Bolts or Yooka-Laylee get that. They just say, oh, look, we're acknowledging we're in a video game. Funny, laugh, you sheep. So I don't laugh, and it sucks. With both games having such similar characters and such similar, like, styles of writing, it's hard to judge this one, but I think I'm ultimately going to give it to Nuts and Bolts. First major point in Nuts and Bolts' favor is that this is indeed still Banjo and Kazooie. These are still the characters that you know and love. Like, characters mean things. Like, people can shit on fans of stuff for being like, oh, like, you know, you just need to see the same old characters and stuff. But people get attached to characters. It's, yes, it is partly about branding, but it's, characters are the core of, like, any narrative work of art. Of course people are gonna get attached to them. So it's incredibly weird that you have Yooka-Laylee, you know, two characters who in personality and in speech patterns and everything are identical to Banjo-Kazooie. They didn't even try to differentiate them as characters. Yooka-Laylee is like if your dad died in a car crash when you were really young and your mom eventually remarried and the stepdad comes in and not only is he like trying too hard to get you to like him, you know, he's like putting on your dad's old clothes, like adopting his old speech patterns, like trying to make you think that he is your dad. That's what Yooka-Laylee is like. Because when I'm playing a Banjo-Kazooie game, I want to be playing a Banjo-Kazooie game. Like, there's a reason that people were excited to see them in Smash Ultimate. Nobody wanted to see Yooka-Laylee in Smash Ultimate. I mean, I guess some people might have, but like, you know, we don't talk about those people. Now, granted, Nuts and Bolts does bungle its characters. Like, there's one level in that stupid fucking game console level. Banjo randomly acts like an asshole, and starts trying to make, like, sarcastic Kazooie quips. And it's just for that level, and there's no explanation for it. It's not like, you know, Banjo's getting insecure about, like, how everyone thinks Kazooie's so clever, and he's, like, trying this out, and he's really bad at it. Like, he just starts, like, calling people names and stuff, and, like, it doesn't get acknowledged until, like, the boss level, and then he just goes back to normal. It's so weird. I don't know why they did that, but there are still plenty of times where the characters are on point, where they feel like themselves. Yooka-Laylee, my problem with them being, you know, such transparent, like, grocery store brand Banjo-Kazooie is twofold, because the plot of the game is that you have this big business boy, capital B, and he's gonna, you know, all the pages are for his big megacorp conglomerate. And so obviously, you know, given that this was a Kickstarter indie game, there's like this fuck Microsoft, fuck Nintendo, we're going our own way, like sort of indie creative spirit to the plot, in theory. The problem is that, one, again, revisionist history, Nuts and Bolts was not a corporate decision, and two, there's nothing creative about Yooka-Laylee. Yooka-Laylee is one of the most creatively bankrupt games I've ever played. Like, I really detest this wave of Kickstarter games that are just the old game from a creator again. Like, say what you will about Death Stranding, but at least, like, Kojima didn't, when he was off on his own, he didn't go make, like Blettle Bleer Blolid or whatever, which is basically what Mighty Number 9, you know, Bloodstain, Yooka-Laylee, like, all this shit. So much talent, so much creative energy, instead of taking what people love about those old games and, like, updating them and bringing them into a new generation, like Mario Odyssey. So much time is being wasted just remaking these games and saying, remember this, give us money because you remember this, and often it's an inferior version, as Yooka-Laylee is. Giving the edge to Nuts and Bolts for at least having the original characters and not being completely bankrupt creatively, while posturing about how great, like, independent artists and the creative indie spirit is. Fuck you, Yooka-Laylee. Okay, so worlds and levels. This is another tricky one, too. So Nuts and Bolts, because it's a car game, famously had to add the GTA minimap. It had to add, you know, these missions and these big empty worlds that weren't meant to be explored. Were basically just playgrounds for the various dumbfuck missions to take place in. On the other hand, you have Yooka-Laylee, which also has big worlds. Yooka-Laylee's worlds aren't so much empty as they are just stretched really thin and really, really confusing. So when it comes to worlds, we can look at this in two different ways. We can look at it in terms of, like, theming, like in what each level sort of based off of, and we can look at it in terms of design. And both of these are important, so let's just cover them both. We'll start with theming because that's a little easier. You have basically 5 worlds in each game plus a hub, and I'm comfortable calling the Nuts and Bolts the winner in regards to theming. So in Nuts and Bolts you have volcano, artificial grass island. I mean, it's not super unique, but I do like how it blends the sort of artificial nature of the game with, you know, your standard Green Hill Zone kind of setting. Like, it works. You have the inside of the game console, which is an inspired idea. The actual level is a nightmare. it's like set up vertically, which you think might be kind of interesting, but because you're driving vehicles, you're just constantly getting caught on a bunch of annoying bullshit. But you know, we'll talk about that in a minute. But as far as like the concept, a level inside of a game console it's fun. Banjo-Land, masturbatory self-congratulation about how great the first two games were and how much better they were than this one. Not great, but at least it has a bitchin' medley, orchestral medley of all the old banjo music by Grant Kirkhope, so I can't complain. Then you have, what was level 4? Oh, the Coliseum. The Coliseum was neat. This probably has the best missions in the game. It's got like a gladiator sort of theme. Yeah, I like the Coliseum. And then you have the terrarium, the space level that takes place in a bunch of tubes, and is like a terrarium, like an alien greenhouse, and that's sort of neat. So with nuts and bolts, at least you don't have a ton of worlds, but they're all pretty distinct. What do we have in Yooka-Laylee? Jungle level, ice level, swamp level, casino level, space level. Very tried and true tropes. The space level, I'll give it a little bit more credit because it's kind of like a space pirate thing, which is sort of fun. But the rest of them, very typical sort of platformer tropes. So Nuts and Bolts definitely has the edge in terms of variety and uniqueness in its locales. But what about, what actually matters? What about the way these worlds are designed? And in that regard, neither is particularly impressive. I already mentioned the game console, but the terrarium to a lesser extent as well is a fucking nightmare to navigate. Like, the terrarium's got all these tubes, the log box has all these like bits and pieces that you're constantly like crashing into. It sucks. Navigating these worlds on vehicles, it sucks. Like, people complain about how big and open the other three worlds are, but like for a driving game, that makes sense. It makes sense that Nutty Acres would be just kind of a field with a volcano and maybe some water. Because the point is that we're setting the stage for the individual challenges. And I think that's one thing, one way they shot themselves in the foot was that, Banjo as a franchise is so much about exploration. It's so much about having memorable characters and locales. So they wanted to include that sort of thing, so they included all these like random notes and other shitty physics objects and, dumb Jinjo challenges everywhere, when really what they should have been focusing on was making quality missions for the vehicle sections. More on that in a bit. Yooka-Laylee, on the other hand, if anyone ever tries to tell you that Yooka-Laylee is just like the 64 games in terms of design, they are wrong. They are dead wrong. The old games, particularly the first one, very tight. Every room had a purpose. Notes and collectibles were laid out pretty naturally to guide you to each challenge, to each new character. If you know what you're doing, you can run through Banjo-Kazooie like really efficiently, even without like speedrunning tech. Everything just feels so natural. That's one of the things that makes it such a joy to replay for me. But yeah, even if you're just kind of bumbling around in the first place, the worlds feel big, but they're really not. Like, they just have a lot of purpose, a lot of focus. There isn't any wasted space in a Banjo-Kazooie level. And even to a lesser extent with Banjo-Tooie, that game got a little more sprawling, and, there's a whole debate over whether or not that was a good thing. We're not here to talk about Banjo-Tooie. Yooka-Laylee is kind of the worst of both worlds in that it has Banjo-Kazooie's, like, simplistic challenges and Banjo-Tooie's, like, sprawling level design, but, like, times 1,000. Nothing leads logically to anywhere. There are no prominent landmarks to help orient yourself ever, except in arguably the space level, because that has each planet like kind of separated into each like planetoid and pod. If you notice in the original Banjo-Kazooie, one of the things that makes it so easy to navigate is that there's usually some prominent landmark that you can see from anywhere and you can orient yourself around. The Arch in Treasure Trove Cove, the Snowman in Freeze Easy Peak, the Mansion in Mad Monster Mansion. They're usually built around a central, thing. There is nothing like that in Yooka-Laylee. And furthermore, while Tooie did, lose some of the focus, at least, the puzzles and the challenges were more complicated. They were actual puzzles. You actually had to think through them, and, had a little bit of a Metroid thing where You'd have to hunt down moves and abilities in later levels and come back and do backtracking to finish the job in some cases. Yooka-Laylee has the simplistic Banjo-Kazooie platforming, but just spread out over these big, messy, bloated worlds that are just a chore to navigate. There aren't really any warp pads like help you get around like there were in 2E, like nothing to help you like save time. Feathers, you know, your note stand-ins are just put wherever. They're not in any like logical places where you would naturally explore. The game often feels like you're kind of breaking it and pushing against it, but like in a bad way, you know what I mean? So really, I mean, this is kind of the question when it comes to design. Would you rather have, you know, big empty GTA levels, or would you rather have really badly designed Banjo-Kazooie levels? And well, there's one tiebreaker that ultimately makes me give this category to nuts and bolts, and that is the hub world. The hub world in Yooka-Laylee, everyone knows it's fucking bad. Everyone says it's bad. It's a mess. There's no sense of progression. Like in Grunty's castle, like you're constantly like scaling the tower and kind of going deeper and deeper into it. That's what they're going for with Ivory Towers. But like every other world in Yooka-Laylee, it's just a like bloated, confusing, meandering, open mess of a world. Showdown Town actually gets at what makes Banjo-Kazooie good. You know, there's a real interesting central loop with Showdown Town. There's, you know, legitimate like secrets with the hidden Jiggy machines, the central loop of, you know, finding the crates and full of parts and transporting them back to Mumbo. That's actually fun because the crates are, you know, put in some secret areas, some that you can only unlock after progressing through the game. Getting new parts actually, you know, kind of fills you with joy because more vehicle parts means more options and sort of the central mechanic. Yeah, so Showdown Town's a really great hub world, which I think, given that and the fact that Nuts and Bolts just has so much more creative aesthetics, we're gonna give this point to Nuts and Bolts. So finally, we come to the last big one. We come to the core mechanics of the game. And so the thing that you can say about Yooka-Laylee is the thing that I've been saying about Yooka-Laylee all the time is that it's Banjo-Kazooie but bad. Mostly for reasons described in the previous segment, you know, like level design and that kind of basic overall stuff. There are a couple other things that this game does that's stupid. The expanding the world mechanic is the most dumb fuck wrong-headed mechanic I've seen in a platformer. Very obviously meant to obfuscate the fact that they only had like enough resources to make 5 unique worlds, and you know, they wanted to have you collecting Jiggies, and they wanted to make collecting Jiggies feel satisfying, so they said, hey, let's just chop off pieces of the level and make you come back and expand them. And this mechanic barely even matters if you're thorough in the first place. Like the only one I ever I always had enough pages to expand, except for obviously the first world. And the first world, it's so obvious that like none of the expansions feel natural. They just take like a chunk of the level, and like you get to that point, and you just like fall off the edge of the earth. It's really sloppily done. It's really bad, and it's not satisfying. It's not satisfying to use your pages to complete an incomplete level. What's satisfying is using your Jiggies to go into great new expanded locations. So that's a bad mechanic. Another bad mechanic is everything having to do with the controls, that stupid power meter, you know, the roll, the replacement for the talent trot is fucking horrible. The controls in general are really sloppy and bad. Like it feels like a budget PS2 game. Like Banjo-Kazooie has better controls, which is crazy. That should not be the case. Yeah, I don't know why, like everything involving that power meter sucks. It regenerates so slowly, and like it's like they realize that people only ever walked around using the talent trot in the N64 games, and we're like, oh, we gotta do something for that. Like, you know, no one's ever gonna walk around as like Yooka. So like, let's make it control like reheated ass and like make you run out of power. And it's like nobody thinks that, you know, using Kazooie to run around as the talent trot is a problem. People love the talent trot. Like, I don't know anyone that would call that like a legitimate flaw with the game. Like, whatever, dude. Like that's just what it feels like to me. And there's lots of little control annoyances like that. Flying feels worse than Banjo-Kazooie. The button combinations in general feel a little clumsy to me. I think part of that is just that, you know, one button crouches, the other goes directly into the roll. But, like, the animation for crouching and rolling are so similar that, like, I often found myself saying, like, wait, is this button combination, like, crouch and do this or roll and do this? Like, shit. It's not super intuitive. But if we're talking about bad controls, nobody, and I mean nobody, can challenge Nuts and Bolts on this. Holy shit, guys. I don't know if you've replayed Nuts and Bolts in a while. The physics are so much worse than you remember. Part of that is just the way that the vehicles are built, because they are kind of like piecemeal, like Lego sort of things, and the vehicle builder does work really well. It is pretty intuitive, but like once you actually take those things for a spin, fucking yikes. Everything in the world is a physics object. Like, no matter how, like, ergonomic you make your car and, like, you know, how much thought you put into the construction, nothing is ever as effective as just making a bin on wheels and, you know, maybe throwing some guns on it. Like, you can clear 80% of the challenges in Nuts and Bolts with one vehicle that does everything. Because most challenges are bring dumb fuck object from point A to point B. Everything's just a giant escort mission. Occasionally you fly through some rings like Superman 64. You may as well just use like a quickly rushed out vehicle, because even if you do try to make something cool, it's gonna control like ass, and you're gonna be constantly smashing into things. Like, you know, your physics object's gonna like hook onto other physics objects, like spin out of control. It sucks. The act of playing Nuts and Bolts really, really fucking sucks, and that is what makes it a bad game. Not that it doesn't follow the old formula. They gave it the old college try. They had some problems. But until this point, nothing I said about Nuts and Bolts is anything that's like super irredeemable. Like, okay, cringy writing, like bad character design. You can still have like a fun vehicle game out of all of that. But in order to do that, the vehicles need to be fun to drive, and there need to be fun reasons to drive them. And so for this, I am ultimately going to give this last point to Yooka-Laylee, because although Yooka-Laylee is just bad Banjo-Kazooie, at its core, bad Banjo-Kazooie is still better than whatever the fuck was going on in Nuts and Bolts. The Collectathon is a tried and true genre of gaming at this point. It's well understood what the appeal is and like how to make a good one, and although they didn't make a good one, far from it, the very basics of like finding a pagey, you know, learning a new move, like even if only for a little bit, that stuff can occasionally be satisfying. Nuts and Bolts, the only time anything is satisfying is Showdown Town. Hey, look at that! The closest thing to a real Banjo-Kazooie. Otherwise, missions are all a complete fucking drag. Driving the cars fucking blows. You're constantly spinning out of control. You know, maybe there are some, like, galaxy brain geniuses who know exactly how to engineer their cars to make the controls not bad and to make them, like, reasonable to drive. But in an engine where vehicle creation is so user-friendly, like, that should not be the case. So, well, yeah, I mean, I guess we've gone through everything. Let's take a look at the grand total. Yeah, I'm as surprised as you. Seems like Nuts and Bolts is our winner. And, you know, that's not saying much. Being better than Yooka-Laylee or Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, you know, it's not something I would put on my resume. But hey, you know what? This is just my opinion. Maybe you think Yooka-Laylee's great. Maybe you think both these games are great and I'm an asshole. Let me know in the comments below. And you know, if you've enjoyed this conversation, I plan on doing more gaming content in the future like this, some more discussions, some more breakdowns. So I'd love it. You can hit me with that like, hit me with that comment. Subscribe to see all the other wonderful stuff that's going to be coming your way on this channel. And yeah, that's it. We've answered it. I guess Nuts and Bolts is better. Bye.